Okay. So hi, I'm Courtney. I use she, her pronouns. I work at the Center for Psychiatric Rehabilitation at Boston University and direct programming here. Some of it has really been steeped in leave of absence policies and practices. So that's what I bring to the table today.
Hi, everyone. My name is Dory Hutchinson, and I am the Executive Director of the Center for Psychiatric Rehabilitation here at Boston University, and I use she, her pronouns as well. I'm also the Director of Services. We are a nationally funded research and training and service center in psychiatric rehabilitation. And one of the things that we do is we provide services both locally for our own university and universities in the Boston area, but also nationally and now internationally for colleges and universities that are serving students who are living with serious mental health conditions. And so today, as Courtney mentioned, we're going to talk about some of the work we've been doing here and with others around the United States around leaves of absence practices and policies.
Really briefly, we're in this to collaborate beyond today. So on the screen are Dory and my contact information, our cell phone numbers and email addresses, if that's a convenient way for you to reach out to us so that we can continue conversations offline about how you are implementing policies and practices that support health promoting leaves of and returns of absence on your campuses. And maybe if other things kind of cross your mind, we're really big on partnering and collaborating and sharing our work and knowledge. So we really encourage you, maybe take a screenshot or save the slide deck to reach out. That's our contact information. And we'll start with a brief historical context of how we arrived at sharing the information we have to share with you today.
Okay, I'm going to start. And actually, in looking at this work that we put together for you, I'm actually going to go back more than a decade in that we've been delivering services here at BU on our campus for people who live with mental health conditions since 1984, which is when I started my work at the center. So for a long time. I would say the work with colleges and college students really started to tick up around the turn of the century. Right around 2000, we began getting calls from parents who had students going to community colleges in the area and private universities and our public universities. Boston is filled with colleges and vocational training programs about their young adult who had dropped out of whatever they were doing, either their vocational training or their educational path. And had literally dropped out and were sitting at home struggling to either return and in some cases struggling to finish. And we began getting requests to help. Could you help my son? Could you help my daughter? And we began doing that informally as a way. The work that we do at the center is all about skills, developing critical skills and helping people get the critical supports they need to thrive in a role they value and in an environment they value. So if we think about higher education, people want to be a student and they want to thrive in that role and they want to thrive on that particular campus. And so we look at what are the critical skills they need for that role and what are the critical supports they need for that role while living with a serious mental health condition. In 2009, I received a campus suicide prevention grant from SAMHSA, and the Substance Abuse Mental Health Services Administration. And that really threw us into kind of the underbelly of college mental health. And we were listening to students talk about, their experiences on campus and what was leading to getting to this place of despair and hopelessness. And we began to develop networks on our campus. We began talking about mental health and student skill development and collaborating across campus with adults and students together. We realized that was a missing piece at that time. And because of that work, I was invited to a college event here in Boston for the local chapter of the National Alliance of Mental Illness. And I went to the event to talk about kind of the landscape of mental health on college campuses. And what was really stunning about that night was I walked into an auditorium at a big public library here in Boston, and there were 80 parents there. And every single one of them had an young adult child who had taken a leave of absence or had left school altogether and were at home. And the parents were trying to cobble together some sort of program because their young adults mostly had rejected the adult system of care, which is very understandable developmentally, right? Is that these young adults might have left and had a hospitalization or left and were seeking some sort of care and treatment, but they weren't working, they weren't in school, they were at home on mom and dad's couch struggling. And parents were asking about, well, what can we do to help our young adult either return to their vocational training or to their community college or to their to the UMass, so that they can get that credential, so that they can move on with their lives and have that credential in order to live the life that they want to live. And I came back from that event and said to my colleagues, we need to do something for young adults who take a leave of absence from their higher education path, because what's out there in the adult mental health system is not a fit. We've known that for decades, that it's not a fit. It's not even a fit for many adults, let alone young adults. But no, it's not a fit. And we need to do something. And we are in a position to do that. So we sought funding from a foundation called the Sidney Bear Foundation. And Sidney Bear was a man who got kicked out of Yale University because he lived with serious mental health problems. And his family had enormous resources. And he ended up living out the rest of his life on the top floor of the Copley Plaza in Boston, which is this very swanky place. But he was isolated, and he ended up, when he died, he ended up leaving all of his money, which was substantial, to a foundation so that no one else would ever have to experience the kind of shame and expulsion that he experienced because he lived with a mental illness. And so we applied to the Sidney Bear Foundation to start a program called the Nateo program. And Nateo means thrive in Latin, and it was designed to be a program for students who had taken a leave of absence from any kind of higher education to come to our campus. We sit on the campus of the university and spend a semester with us building their skills, their wellness, their academic, their interpersonal, their social, spiritual skills, so that they could return to wherever they had come from, or maybe go somewhere new and continue to grow and thrive as a healthy adult. And so we received this foundation money to start this program, and we needed someone to run it. And I found Courtney Jolie Loudermilk, which was kind of a great find. She was visiting our center, and a colleague of mine came downstairs and said, you have to go upstairs and meet this woman. She's amazing. And she worked at another university. And so we actually convinced her to come over and begin to help us build this program from the ground up. So I'm going to let Courtney tell you how she did that.
So thanks, Dory. And in 2014, we launched Nateo. So this full semester-long leave of absence program still exists, I'm happy to say, after 8 years still running strong at the Center for Psychiatric Rehabilitation at BU. It's reached hundreds of students from very, very many different universities, both across the US and outside of the US, and help them return to school or work or both. Nateo is great for you to have in your back pocket as we're talking about leave of absence practices. To my knowledge, a program like this does not exist in another college campus, though there are some similar supported education models out there, nothing quite as robust as this, internationally as well. And so what we did, starting right away was listen really closely to the students' experiences of taking a leave and what it felt like them for a return, what it took, what documentation they needed to submit, what interviews they needed to be a part of, what questions they had to answer about how things would be, I'm using air quotes, different when they go back, what they learned from their episodes, these kinds of questions that were really, you could tell students were stuck in the middle of wanting to answer it honestly and wanting to answer it just because I want to go back to school, this is what I want. So we've taken the student voices from all these collective years to arrive at some of the sort of what we would call, while we're here today, some of the best practices around policies, programming, and other supportive practices. I'm going to continue just past the rest of this momentum and to highlight that many people have had a hand in all this collective information gathering. And then in 2020, we really, probably around 2019, formed a very strong relationship with a local organization, the Ruderman Family Foundation, who through their partnership and generous contributions were able to take all of the cumulative stories and ideas and programming that we'd run and piloted and evaluated here and put it all together in the form of 2 guides, one for students who might be on a leave of absence or have had an interruption to school, and maybe for whom Nateo wasn't quite the right fit, or maybe they weren't here in Boston, some kind of points of access were not, all aligned for them to participate in the program. The other was for campus administrators who were looking for ideas around policies, very student-centered, person-centered policy and practice ideas. And so those 2 guides launched in 21 and continue to be disseminated. We'd like to provide you with, I know we have probably about maybe 10 minutes or so, some of sort of the take-home points in these guides. On your screen, if this is of interest to you, there is a QR code you can scan to get access to the leave of absence guide for students. It's meant to be disseminated and utilized by students who are across the lifespan at any college or university, undergrad or grad. It's meant to be sort of like I'm kind of like turning the pages like a workbook. It's sort of meant to be just like this kind of stepped, interactive workbook, really, like interactive workbook for students to be able to get some guidance around how they complete their program at their own pace. And this acronym PACE happens to be a pretty important mechanism that highlights people. So during a leave of absence, we know we need people. A is academics. While it may not be coursework, we know our students are curious, people with intellectual needs. So some kind of academic stimulation. C is care. The C in PACE stands for care. And that means whatever care is meaningful to that person culturally. And the E is engagement, part-time work, involvement in the community, volunteering, whatever it might be. So PACE is the acronym. The QR code will get you access to this interactive workbook.
And if I could just add in there that PACE comes from, a deep look at the evidence-based practices that help people and young adults who live with serious mental health conditions to thrive. Those principles that Dory's highlighting are steeped in the leave guide for leadership, faculty, and staff who, we really thought carefully about who could open and make use of this guide or workbook. And it really can be in the hands of anyone on a college campus, as we believe firmly that everyone has a shared responsibility in engaging students in conversations about how and if they take leaves, supporting them during a leave, and in a health promoting return. So again, on your screen is a QR code that will take you directly to the administrative guide. This was, again, there are, if you maybe like page 2 of both of these guides, there are lots of names and organizations. This was not done in a silo. Lots of people had input and opportunities to share their ideas, and wisdom is really echoed throughout the pages.
Maybe, a couple of highlights for things that we're thinking of before a student goes out on leave. We've got a couple of slides here that highlight some ideas of how we are inviting a cross-campus, very collaborative effort to invite students to explore their options. Like many difficult conversations, I think that the default can be kind of hands up and steer clear of it. Especially out of worry or concern that by talking about a leave of absence, it will make it happen and a student will never come back. We know that students, in particular undergrads, complete their undergraduate degree in on average over 5 years in the US from 4-year programs. So we know students take leaves of absence. We're not making it happen and not having them come back by talking about it. In fact, we're engaging them in a real conversation and providing a point of access for them. And we like to say I don't know, we'd be doing our jobs if we didn't lay out all the options for them and help them make a choice about what's right for them and pointing out the ways that it's health promoting. Something that's kind of highlighted here on the screen is that providing learn from anywhere models where students can engage in care they need that might be residential at times, as well as their coursework. This was an idea that came up well before the pandemic, sorry. And so, a model that we know can work to help students stay in school and minimize interruptions that might have. Really, we're talking about avoiding a leave in the first place for those students who have brief hospitalizations during the semester, whatever it might be. As we think about kind of policies, inviting across different types of leaves of absence, maybe the idea that these are consolidated and there are not so many types of leaves. And if there are designated types, that there is parity across them, meaning that the length of time that the leave requires or the requirements upon return are equitable and
I'll just jump in here that this last point is really critical, because in the scan that we have done and did to create these guides is that there are a lot of places that lack parity, that there is a difference across campuses for students who take a medical leave for, say, an appendicitis versus a medical leave for depression. And we are bound by the law to have parity across these types of conditions. But many schools and campuses have found themselves going down different paths. So we, in these guides, are really encouraging that, looking at one's policies to ensure that we are meeting our legal obligations to support all students who take a leave in equal ways and to support their return in equal ways.
Absolutely. Some other things maybe we're thinking about before a student goes on a leave is concise and transparent steps and processes that students really are making an informed decision before they go. Lots of times there are steps that are involved for students that involve lots of different units and people. So really also kind of seeing that any steps a student, your university or college organization sees need to happen are quite streamlined and really not a barrier to making what could be a health promoting decision to leave. That the language in those steps and checklists are empowering and choice oriented. They're really clear that your goal is students' well-being and students' fulfillment of their post-secondary goals. Again, this is just kind of a little taste of some of what are across the guides and where we hope to go with a Q&A. So I'm going to go to the meat and potatoes during a leave. This is the biggest time that we hear from students. They feel out of sight, out of mind. Many US universities and colleges do not allow students to be physically on campus or engaged in any way during their leave. And students feel this, that it kind of compounds the shame and the isolation that happens for them. Some universities are lucky to have a case manager, someone whose work and job it is to do some outreach during this time. And we invite, where possible, kind of broadening that, which does mean securing fiscal resources at your college or university to to see that these things can happen. For example, what is bolded here is like a touch point, almost like a class, helping students stay connected, see that, that mascot or your college name or logo on a weekly basis as a touch point for something that they're engaged in and supported by during the leave of absence. All of our conversations, Dory, back in like 2014, when I started here, were around, students were looking for any demonstration. The colleges were asking for this, that things have changed and gotten better during their leave of absence. And yet there's no programming or very little programming, I should say, and options for them to participate in meaningful ways to maintain their skills and build skills. So we invite universities to think about ways that could happen. We happen to host, you might have seen this on an earlier screen, a class called LEAD, L-E-A-D. It's an acronym to learn, explore, access, and develop. It is a skills building class we host every semester for free, online and in person here at Boston University. We offer it in Spanish as well. And LEAD has been disseminated across many colleges and universities in the US and outside of the US, as in some cases of this exactly, an opportunity for students to stay engaged, a learning experience, a class or course or workshop, whatever you call it, for students to stay engaged during their leave. And we've seen great success around this. During the leave, how-to videos, many of this is crowdsourced too, students saying what would work for them. If you've had a chance to kind of peek through any of the student guide so far, you'll see their voices and quotes about their experiences and what they're looking for from colleges and universities. There are many conversations we have and need to have around supporting international students, thinking about the length of leave that they're working with as they consider what's possible even for taking a leave and returning. And a couple of ideas to put out there around returning from leaves. Again, some kind of net that helps students navigate what it would mean to come back, starting with clear, accessible, transparent steps for the processes. Sometimes those are even hard to find. Accessible deadlines, interactive checklists, guidance that there might be someone or people helping students navigate what classes they're taking, all of the bits and pieces around, where they're going to live, care, and much of this can be peer provided, providing a learning opportunity like a class, a workshop. Many colleges and universities have like first year experiences or transfer experiences. Maybe something along the lines of like a leave experience, students coming back from leave and peers supporting each other, maybe even some kind of mentoring model where people who have returned from a leave can tell their stories, including, staff and faculty, people across the campus. I think there's great value in those stories being out there, that leaves are very disruptive and upending when they happen, and what happens after that, celebrating those stories on our college campuses, and finding ways to elevate those voices. Coaching, workshops, so many ideas. And Dorian, I want to make sure we have time to answer specific questions you might have about things on your mind on college, on your campuses. So I'm going to pause there. And we want to hear from you. Carolyn, thanks for posting the links to these guides in the chat.
No problem. I actually have a question while
Sure.
other people are thinking. I heard recently the Lumina Foundation did a study, and they reported that 75% of college students reported wanting to stop out, and that mental health reasons were the single greatest factor that they listed. And so I'm curious if you have had very much success in conversations with the people on campus is really working toward retention of students, academic retention and those rates on campuses, or if you've primarily worked with mental health staffs.
That's a great question. I'll jump in and then let Courtney say it echoes the data that's coming out of the CDC as well about college students. You know, anywhere between 70 and 80% are really struggling with their mental health not post-pandemic, but as we are in this weird place now with not just a health pandemic, but all the social and political unrest that's out there in the world. All of it, I think, is impacting our young adults. And so we do know that the return on investment for creating a campus culture that supports mental health is really important. It's a win-win for retention. It's a win-win for, the students. So, financially, morally, all of those reasons why we want to create a culture that supports student mental health on campus, really, really important, because students are struggling. They're really struggling. And I think one of the silver linings of the past couple of years is at least we're talking about it, but what we actually do and how we respond to these issues is really important right now, which is why Courtney was emphasizing that we feel it's everyone's responsibility, not just mental health staff. There's got to kind of be this no wrong door approach to our mental health, because we all have mental health. This is not just for some people. Mental health conditions do not discriminate again on any factor at all. And so creating places and spaces and people and activities where people can come and say, I'm struggling with my mental health anywhere on our campuses, and have an empathetic response and some sort of institutional response is just so important. And it's important, again, from all those different reasons. I'm a faculty member as well, and we are under pressure about retention and our numbers, right? That's the higher ed is a business at the end of the day as well. But then there's kind of, what's important. Where is our soul as institutions of higher education? It's making sure we create spaces that care for all of our students.
To Dory's point about a return on investment, Daniel Eisenberg, who's now at UCLA, has a return on investment calculator that's really, quite interestingly ties the economics to programming and efforts that we make to retain students. With those really high numbers, Carolyn, as Dory's saying, involving campus partners behind and in any realm, res life, academic advisors, many times the programming that we support colleges and universities take on to support students on leave, those programs are, run by sometimes counselors, sometimes philosophy faculty. I think there's really no wrong person to help promote and engage students who are on leave of absence. So yeah, we do really value any community member being a part of this. Thanks, Dory, for answering that question. Juliana's question about Nateo is a semester-long program mostly geared for undergrad 18 to 25. And we have talked about what that could look like for graduate students. Because it's so time intensive, we're conscientious of what's on graduate students' plates outside of their coursework. We've designed kind of more in the vein of like workshops to support those student populations. We work really closely with with the Sargent College here at the university, supporting graduate students in their clinical work and developing clinical skills, interpersonal skills, and their professional identity. Again, to interrupt leaves of absence, that could happen for lots of reasons. Their academic work is sometimes what is kind of like predominantly front and center in the cause for what precipitates their leave. So helping them build the skills.
We've done a fair amount of work with community colleges in the state of Massachusetts, which is, a different approach as well, because so many of the community college students are often almost like graduate students. They're juggling a lot, right? They're taking a course. They might come in real quick for 1 or 2 classes, and then they're off working, raising families, doing other things. And so disseminating this kind of content into every class curriculum has been a big push for the community colleges in Massachusetts. Again, this idea of a no wrong door. If the only person you see is the one professor that on Tuesday night, then that one professor is empowered enough to have that conversation of I'm worried about you, or here's what you can do when you hear the story from the student.
Joseph, I see your question about supporting students with family members who are living with a mental health condition. We do have a family program. It's really kind of separate from the program we do to support students directly. I'll drop the link in the chat. The parents and family members, caregivers, or guardians who participate in this program, Flourishing Families, may live with a mental health or substance use condition themselves. It's actually kind of more designed for the focus is more supporting parents, guardians, and caregivers who have a young adult who lives with a mental health or substance use condition. Parents may also have their own lived experience. It's really about supporting family relationships, cultivating communication as it relates to young adults, supporting the young adult to understand and move through a leave of absence, make their way back to meaningful work or involvement, relationships, school, whatever it might be. And I'm sorry, Candace, you've got a case study, so I want to kind of pause there and make sure there's room for that.
Hello.
Hi.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Please, your information is awesome. So if there's more questions, I think you're the meat and potatoes. So, well, if anyone has more questions after that, feel free, please. Definitely a learning experience for everyone. So Carolyn, do you want me to go right in with the case?
Yeah, give me 1 second, Candace. I'll share the case on screen and you can walk us through it. Okay,
cool.
Yeah. Thanks again to Courtney and Dory while I'm pulling this up. We'll really appreciate your time and hopefully we answered the questions. A lot of links in the chat and we'll make sure those go out in the recap as well. Okay, go ahead and take it away, Candace, if you can see that.
Yes, thank you. So I'll read the case and then offer up some discussion and questions and responses. So the student began to show indifferent behaviors that were not consistent with his usual quiet presentation. The student started sending inappropriate messages to other students in group texts, was inappropriate in communication with faculty, and was disruptive in class. And examples of that: sitting on a desk, inappropriate comments out loud in class during class. The student's behaviors caused other students to feel uncomfortable. After discussing these behaviors with the student, a referral was made to the counseling center and the student began to meet with a mental health specialist. 1 week later, the student sent a video of himself doing karate moves and shooting a Nerf gun to background music. The student didn't threaten anyone specifically, but this was alarming, especially after some of the student's behaviors that have been displayed. So after this, the student was placed on a mandatory break period from classes until a psychiatric assessment or psychological evaluation occurred. The student's parents were also involved, and this was requested by the student, and they were very, very involved, and at times making excuses for the behaviors, though. After the assessment and a meeting with the behavioral intervention team co-chair, who's also the director of student conduct, myself, the director of the counseling center, and the VP of student affairs, the student was permitted to return to classes. And of course, we had a plan set up with goals and different ways to support the student also. After several weeks, the student requested a medical withdrawal and decided to take a leave from school to get better, and the student may possibly return next semester. And so just questions that I have: how are other institutions handling these situations? What policies and procedures do other institutions have in place? We did offer the student a variety of options, but it's important to point out that sometimes it depends on the program a student is in, is if how a leave of absence can work. Some programs are way more demanding than others, and some programs, if you miss a week, it's like you've missed a month in some other courses. So in this situation, without disclosing any more specific information about the case and the student, it was one of those programs that it just really would have been hard to take a leave and complete some things at home. It just wasn't a course or a degree program that would have allowed that.
Thanks, Candace. We'll
Okay.
open it up for clarifying questions and discussion around the case. So again, use the chat, unmute, whatever your preference is.
I'll kickstart. Candace, will you tell us more about the length of the mandatory break period and if the student was allowed to be on campus, stay on campus, engage in any way in their work?
It was just a week, and what we allowed them to do is we actually paid for that, of course, we didn't require, but we gave them that option. It was paid for by our counseling center. We offer psychiatric services, and we have an emergency pot for things like this. The student was allowed to participate in a virtual manner and was allowed to have access to the material. So we made sure that the student did have access to that, because it was causing him anxiety to not have that. But also, faculty was very supportive and also encouraging the student to use that time to rest. I do want to point out also is that sometimes when this happens, these mental health concerns, of course, many of us are mental health professionals or deal with this, but, this was also a product of starting medication, which we all know sometimes, that doesn't work with psychotropic medication. It can cause some symptoms to worsen. And so just something good to always ask deep questions, because that came out after we probed more about some things.
Yeah. I think that's a really common experience, especially when students go off to college. They think, oh, this time it'll be different, right? Because they don't like, who wants to take medication that interferes in the way that these do, even though they can be helpful. That is a common reason why students who come to campus with a mental health condition might begin to struggle, and also all the lifestyle behaviors that can come with young adulthood that can really deplete their well-being.
Mm-hmm.
There was a question in the chat, Candace, about if there was any communication with the school and with the student while he was on leave. And I think you kind of alluded to that with some of the coursework stuff with the faculty, but could you elaborate?
Yes, very much so. I contacted the student, and the student had a mental health specialist in our center that they met virtually that week. So the student did have appointments during that week. I also pulled in, of course, the VP and student conduct, because as the counseling center director, I like us to stay out of that, and mandating, that's not our position. That needs to come from administration. And so for other counseling center directors out there, it's kind of good for us to be there for support, explain why these behaviors are not okay, and help strategize for new behaviors and goals, but let the other paperwork type things come from higher administration. And please feel free, those that are leading this discussion, please tell me if that's okay and that's what you guys usually recommend.
You have me thinking, Candace, your question about procedures. Dory and I are after, I don't know if I call it procedure, but a process. One of the services we offer here at the center is a college coaching model of supporting students one-on-one. And we're often tapped to help students through navigating these really, as you're pointing out in the chat, all of these factors, appointment skills, their medication management, but also just kind of maybe how they're bringing awareness to how they're presenting themselves, so that they can stay in school and kind of coach them through these experiences when you're in the classroom. And I'm kind of thinking of examples on the full spectrum, students who are maybe like actively experiencing psychosis and who are, helping them stay in class and take notes and find ways that this can be done productively. The coaching is kind of a really helpful model, that maybe the mental health specialist did some of this on your campus. The coach can be someone who, they don't have to meet in like an office. The coach often goes out for walks or, meals with the student, checks in with them by text and phone. It can be very casual, seeing that they're eating well and sleeping. And again, maybe like a key and sort of in your others involved bucket, a key person to help with some of the practical support that students need.
To that point, we have a really cool research grant that's ongoing right now with the University of Massachusetts Medical School, where we are training peers on campus who are upperclassmen who are living successfully with mental health conditions to coach first and second year students who live with mental health conditions. And they get a lot of supervision and training, and it's a paid job for them. But the data is really compelling. We are keeping those first and second year students on campus, and they are thriving. They get connected because the upper class student knows, like, this is what can happen during midterms if you go off your medication and you don't sleep and you live with bipolar illness, because I do too. And it happened to me. So here's what you need to do. And they hear it so much better, I think, often from their peers first than they do from adults. And they're doing okay academically, socially. They know students will say, here's the best place to study. Here's who you can go talk to at disability services if you need another accommodation. Here's who can help you at student behavioral health office. So that peer mentoring coaching model we're finding is a really powerful intervention. It's student to student. And it also, there's so much data that shows that when students are struggling, they turn to one another, not to us adults. And so they can be a first line of defense and support. We obviously need to train and support those students as well. But many of these students we're in our 4th year of this. It's a randomized clinical trial, and it's going very well. So I think there's a great future in these peer mentoring and coaching models.
Mm-hmm.
I had a question about, was there communication from the school while the student's on leave? Yes, that's included in our plan to reach out and just check in. And I know that the program the student was in also plans to do that as well to ensure. And I saw Nate Hensley made a good point. Is like, it's hard for first year students who come to college after their parents or family support have been the primary helpers for med management skills and appointments. That was something for this student. Even though the student was a little older, the parents were very involved, overly involved a little bit, and helped control some of that and assist with some of that. And that does become a concern because students are used to having that and aren't sure how to manage that on their own and independently sometimes.
Mm-hmm.
Who else has a question? We call that the echo pause, Courtney and Dory, if you haven't ever heard of that term, where the awkward silence while people are getting their thoughts together.
I mean, Candace, I want to reflect back to you at how much I hear like this approach, this like really team-oriented approach the campus took, as many players kind of looking at this, how to support the student as much as possible, involving parents where you could, listening to the student, what they wanted, what they need.
Well, yeah, we really tried to do that and kind of try to use a wraparound approach on campus to assist students.
Mm-hmm.
See, Joseph Holiday had a good question. I don't know if that's, I don't think that's for me though. Our services on our campus are primarily for students only, but I see that as a good question. Like, what if a family member or a person's spouse is having the concerns? How can that, apply to them?
Hey, Candace, I wanted to address something that I'm sure you probably run into with some of the people involved, and that is the student is difficult because of what they're experiencing. Maybe there are faculty, staff, other students that don't want this student to come back. And so how do you, especially like as a leader in your center, how do you manage that type of just realistic mindset that people are going to have?
Trying to look, of course, acknowledge that, but also look at, is the students, are you and the other students safe, and is that student safe, and how big is the distraction? I explained to them sometimes people are allowed to be different and maybe quote weird or whatever that means to us. No, they're not allowed to be unsafe in your classroom or cause a disruption or distraction to that point. But we've got to differentiate between that. Is it maybe a personality that kind of just gets on your nerves? Or is it really a distraction to the point it's a problem? And so we'll try to ask them that way and maybe give them suggestions on how to work with someone that, that may be the concern. But we do try to acknowledge people's concerns, or, we get it. You're trying to have a 3 or 4 hour class and someone's very distracting, and it's very important, or all information is important in our classes, but very, hard, tedious information. So I think that's a good point. People are going to have those concerns and may not want those students to return.
Yeah. Holding people accountable for their attitudes and biases, that we are here for students.
Right.
Not the other way around.
Right.
And that's kind of what Dory's talking about, this shared accountability across campuses. Everyone has a responsibility to help whole students grow as whole people. That might mean that at times your content is not as important as helping a student navigate their wellness and being there for them in their growth, their whole person growth.
And I think we have experienced in the work that we do that sometimes, because mental health conditions are relatively invisible until they're not, right? Is that when a student says, I live with this, it can be dismissed or disparaged or diminished by faculty and staff. And then when it's very evident, it can be discriminated against. And so there is a need programmatically and policy-wise to really be educating people, about the universality of mental health and what stigma does. It can be very quiet on our campuses, and it can actually, help students choose not to seek help before it gets to become a crisis, because they are worried what will happen to them. We see this a lot, around our athletes on campus, who are afraid if they let anyone know they're struggling with their mental health, they're going to lose their playing time. Right. And then it becomes a crisis, and then they do lose their playing time. Right. So trying to educate coaching staff and administrative staff that these are important topics to be talking about with your student athletes as well. And in other groups on campus. In our first generation center, students whose whole family has helped them get where they are today. They don't want to step out for any reason at all. There's a lot at stake here. And so creating a space where people can talk about mental health and feel safe doing that is really, really important.
The Mary Christie Foundation partnered with a couple of local organizations here, Boston University School of Public Health, the Healthy Minds Network. I just dropped in the chat, I think their 2021 report that highlighting kind of the role of faculty have in supporting our students who are in distress, whether or not they live with a diagnosed mental health condition or substance use condition, but that it's quite interesting, kind of like in terms of when we're talking about engaging students in conversation about their well-being, as in like, how are you like high level questions, and staff and faculty's perception of maybe their kind of responsibility, I'm using air quotes, but like the responsibility to do that, their willingness to do it, what they worry will happen, you know, when you ask and engage. And Dory and I've spent a lot of time in the last, probably more than 4 or 5 years, helping staff and faculty find their footing and the language and their posture around really supporting all the students in their learning and living spaces on campuses. And, you know, I think that what we hear a lot of is, I'm not a trained counselor, and it's quite helpful. Actually, neither am I, you know, and also there's a role we can all play to support student wellness.
Any final questions or comments? This has been great.
Candace, thanks for putting that story out there. And you're representing your personal work and probably hours of what you've listened to and tried to coordinate and support. And we're all in this with big hearts. And I can hear that in your work. So thanks for putting your story out there.
Thank you.
Okay, if there aren't any other questions, we'll move on to the wrap up portion. But thank you again to Candace. Appreciate the submitting the discussion form. Dory, Courtney, great presentation. We will be sure to make sure all the links, the slides, all that are in the recap email. You guys will see that as well. So everybody will have access to it. I'm going to drop in the evaluation link into the chat for the day's session. That'll also be in the recap email. So if you don't get to it before we end today, you will have access to it. We encourage everybody to fill that out. Our next session is going to be on December 6th. So be on the lookout for more information as that gets closer to the session date. And I think that is it. Jam-packed session. Very great. Very good. That was great. Huge thank you to everybody that participated, and we will see you in a month here in December.
Thank you, everyone.
Thanks.
All right. Take care.
Thank you.
Thanks, Carolyn.